Welcome to Wandering Jews at J Squared Adventures. Travel far enough and you meet yourself.
We're your hosts. I'm Scott.
I'm Sorrel.
God said, "See, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon the earth, and every tree has seed-bearing fruit. They shall be yours for food. And all the animals on the land, and the birds of the sky, and everything that creeps on earth, in which there is breath of life, I give all the green plants for food." And it was so. Genesis, Bereshit 1:29 and 30. From the very beginning, when Jews told the story of creation, there stood a recognition that food is a gift and a responsibility. That food was part and parcel of human beings' ethical task to care for the garden that is planet Earth. Le'ovda or leshomra, to till it and to care for it. Genesis, Bereshit, chapter 2.
And in our history, Israel, like all ancient peoples, we were first and foremost farmers. From the time that the agricultural revolution began in the Neolithic Near East, some 12,000 years ago, there was a profound appreciation of the toil that it requires to plant a field, grow plant from seed, and eventually bring in a harvest. When bread baking began, some 10,000 years ago, nearly 8,000 years before the period that we associate with the fathers and mothers of the ancient Hebrews, there was a widespread appreciation of the meaning of food and a really intimate relationship to food and the work that was required to feed a family, a tribe, a village, and a city.
Yeah, and today we're so disconnected from that in terms of where our food comes from and how it's grown and the work that goes into it. But it really is no surprise, as you mentioned, that the Jewish people, like all ancient peoples, they blessed their meals in prayer. They offered their food products in sacrifice to the divine. Food was not something that they could take for granted. It was something to be cherished because producing food literally meant life or death.
And talking about things to be cherished. So in order to keep that kind of feeling of cherishing, there are Jews who include in their practice reciting Birkat HaMazon, the prayer recited after a meal, thanking God for the sustenance provided. It's a prayer rooted in gratitude, acknowledging that as well as it being a physical need, it's also a spiritual gift. Food connects us to our history, our community, and the divine. So, if we look at Birkat HaMazon, the Hebrew, Hazan et ha'olam kulo b'tuvo, b'chein, b'chesed, u'berachamim. Hu noten lechem l'chol basar, ki liolam chasta. Sovereign God of the universe, we praise you. Your goodness sustains the world. You are the God of grace, love, and compassion, the source of bread for all who live, for your love is everlasting. So in Birkat HaMazon, there's this element also of praying for justice, right? Praying for the farmers, those without enough, and the future of our land.
That example of Birkat HaMazon, and obviously at the beginning of a meal, blessings over bread or other types of food. When we look at Jewish tradition, so much of our stories and customs bring us back to those long centuries when the Jewish people lived as farmers and shepherds and fishermen in and on the land of Israel.
100%. Like, look at the Jewish calendar, right? You can see it through the lens of an agricultural year. We have Sukkot, we have Passover, we have Shavuot. These three festivals are all linked to the idea of planting, seasons, growing, and harvest. And actually the Bible mentions, right, we have the Shiva Minim, the 7 species of the land of Israel, the richest of the life-giving vegetation that were the basis for life and symbolic of good living. So we have wheat, barley, grape, fig, pomegranates, olive oil, and date honey. And the source for that is in Deuteronomy, Devarim 8:8.
Archaeology, the Gezer tablet, uncovered at the site of a biblical period town containing one of the oldest Hebrew inscriptions found to date. The dating corresponds roughly to 1000 BCE. That would be the period that we consider the period of the judges of Israel, and on the cusp of the Israelite adoption of a monarchy, first under Saul and later under the Davidic house. One theory holds that this Gezer inscription may have been a school child's writing exercise, and that the inscription may have been a well-known formula, almost like a Mother Goose rhyme, teaching children about the rhythms of the agricultural year. 2 months gathering, 2 months planting, 2 months late sowing, 1 month cutting flax, 1 month reaping barley, 1 month reaping and measuring grain, 2 months pruning, 1 month summer fruit.
And even when the Jewish people were exiled from the lands of Israel, we were no longer in our lands, we were driven out by conquering empires, we carried with us the memories of land, of farming. It still remained very much part of our identity and the food that was produced with such sweat and toil by our ancestors.
Now, so much has changed since those times. And again, you go back to the period of the Gezer tablet of the kings of Israel. It's estimated that the planet's population at around 1000 BCE stood at 50 million people. At the time of the Second Temple, the period of Jesus, Herod the Great, the Jewish revolt against Rome, estimated population of the planet, 300 million people, comprised the entire human race. And as technology advanced, including agriculture, the numbers continued to grow.
By the eve of the Second World War, 1939, we're talking about 2.2 billion people living on planet Earth. And today, in 2025, almost a century later, 8.2 billion of us can share what Carl Sagan referred to as the big blue marble. And obviously, throughout the ages, the advancements of technologies from medicine to engineering and agriculture, all of these factors contributed to the growth of the human race and to our ability to till and care for our garden planet. But the flip side of that is that the advancement of technology also caused a terrible degradation of resources, including the most basic, air and water and fertile land that could be used to feed humanity.
No, there's nothing free in those advancements, as you point out. Today, we're paying the price. The questions of human development, the issues of biodiversity, of clean water, clean air, microplastics, I mean, you name it, the climate crisis. All of these things were largely caused by human interference in a very delicate natural balance. The question of how we continue, and most importantly, how we'll be able to feed ourselves moving ahead. In many of the richest countries in the world, the seeming contradiction is that we're able to produce enormous amounts of food, yet we also throw away vast amounts of food. And there are so many of us in these very countries who are hungry. In the United States alone, for example, 668 million tons of food were produced in the U.S. in 2020. In the same year, 60 million tons of food were thrown away. In 2023, 13.5% of U.S. households face food insecurity. Put simply, there are millions of Americans, almost 18 million, whose kids go to sleep hungry every night.
These figures are really jarring.
Staggering.
And if we turn our attention from the US and we take a look at Israel, although clearly we're a small country, you know, we've pulled our weight definitely over the years in connection with being at the forefront of agricultural innovations and the responsibility of how to feed people in a world where the population has expanded tremendously at the same time as natural and agricultural resources are shrinking. And it seems that already in ancient times, dating us back way before the agricultural revolution, Israel was a pioneer. We were an agricultural pioneer. You know, in 2015, 10 years ago, researchers from Tel Aviv, Haifa, Ben Gurion, and Harvard universities found the oldest evidence for crop cultivation at Ohalo 2, an archaeological site on the southern shore of the Sea of Galilee, 23,000 years ago. This finding indicates that agriculture developed in Israel a full 12,000 years earlier than researchers had previously estimated that humans had even begun farming. It's pretty wild.
Pretty wild. Yeah, definitely. And in modern times, with the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, the introduction of modern farming techniques vastly increased food production and the standard of living in what became the state of Israel, from drip irrigation to desalination, tech being used to increase and better dairy farming, desert-based fish farms. Israel in 2025 produces 95% of its own food, And this according to the Times of Israel and Mordor Intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, new technologies are set in place all the time. Today in Israel, there are over 500 agricultural technology, agtech startups, alongside nations like South Korea, Japan, Italy, and France. We're definitely top of the list innovator in all things agtech. What are some examples that come to mind, Scott?
Bees. I mean, we know that without bees, the entire ecosystem would simply collapse. I mean, again, the production of global food relying on these colonies of tiny insects. 75% of what we eat is pollinated by bees, while 40% of bee colonies are collapsing every year. Beewise, a company Israel-based, has developed a computer technology that they can build autonomous beehives that control and monitor the health of a colony. Over 250,000 hives have been saved using Beewise technology up until today. Meat production. Meat production is wickedly expensive. Cattle requires vast land and water resources. Meat drives climate change in a couple of ways. First, through cows' emission of methane, a potent greenhouse gas, and second, by destroying forests as they're converted to grazing land. Time magazine in 2023 said the following: 3 of the first 8 cultivated meat companies in the world started in Israel. Allah Farms, Super Meat, and Believer Meats, along with NASDAQ-listed newcomer Stakeholder Foods, are poised for international distribution once local food regulators authorize sales of lab-grown meat. And in the fields of wheat production, so seriously strained by the ongoing Russian war against the Ukraine, let alone by climate change, Israel stands at the cutting edge of technologies to develop stronger strains of wheat, more resistant to heat, able to survive on lower water supplies, and stronger against diseases. The Israel Plant Gene Bank of the Volcani Center, agricultural research organization, right outside of Tel Aviv, they're developing a seed library, and along with Israel's internationally recognized universities, advancing technologies to improve the seed and the soil needed to keep wheat production at a pace that can feed the world.
It's pretty impressive. Yet, with all of that said, right, and, taking into account everything you said about the impressive level of Israel agtech innovation noted, bottom line, there are too many Israelis that are hungry. I mean, it's just staggering when we look at the numbers and, just to shine a spotlight on the incredible NGOs that are working to solve the problem. Leket is Israel's largest NGO that focuses on food insecurity and nutrition justice, shares a very grim situation that despite Israel's powerhouse status as an innovator in agricultural research and technology, the reality is, quote, poverty in Israel is a significant problem, but the issue is often unspoken of, or even worse, unknown to the public, especially Jewish communities abroad. According to the National Insurance Institute's 2021 data, 21% of the Israeli population lives in poverty. Just sit with that for a moment. And as if this was not alarming enough, the statistics are even more dreadful when we're speaking about children living in poverty. They make up 28% of the population. So we're talking about almost 1 in every 3 children living in poverty.
Yeah, the report that you're quoting from Leket, their 2022 Alternative Poverty Report, it continues and it talks about who are the populations. It's not surprising. The populations that are most affected are what are sometimes called marginalized populations, single mothers, the elderly, Orthodox Jewish communities, Arab communities. Poverty is not only about people who grew up and who were trapped in low socioeconomic environments. It's about all kinds of folks. And results from a survey of Letet's aid recipients found that 18.4% of the families requesting assistance from Letet can basically be called the Israeli middle class. And so, again, we're talking about a situation where, yes, again, Israel, powerhouse, innovator, pioneer, but there's a lot of work to be done. And like so many other Western nations, Israel's long-standing social platforms and governmental assistance agencies, and this only adds to the situation, they've shrunk over the years. They've been phased out since the 1980s in a situation where the state is less willing and less equipped to take on issues of public health, nutrition justice. The constructive role of NGOs like Leket is crucial. We couldn't do without them.
So you talked about Leket, and another example of an organization at the forefront of providing on-the-ground responses to Israel's poor and hungry is an organization called Pantry Packers. They're the food distribution arm of Tzedakah Central, Kol Chabad, which is actually Israel's oldest continuously operating social services network. So every month, Pantry Packers delivers 37,000 households with food cards and crates of produce to Israel's most vulnerable families and senior citizens. They also partner with Leket. We're going to be hearing from the chairman and founder of Leket in a little while. They partner with Leket that bring food to their distribution centers. They also have Meals on Wheels, where you can order meals online from their website. And they have a total of 23 soup kitchens, and I know that number is growing throughout the country. And these food crates contain essential food items, rice, pasta, canned goods, and also household necessities beyond food, like cleaning supplies and toiletries, supporting families across the board. And so, their packing plant, actually, they run a packing plant in Jerusalem. And many times, J Square travelers, when they come with us, they will volunteer and help pack food crates, which is pretty amazing.
When we take a look at everything that we've covered in this episode, from the beginnings of history, really, up until the challenges that remain with us today, Jewish tradition and our historic experience, we've always been connected to the land, and there's always been a great appreciation for food, and I'll even dare to say for food justice. We looked at the global impact of Israeli innovation in water, agri-tech. We looked at also the innovations of committed activist organizations, Leket, Pantry Packers, Leket, who we'll continue with, all of these groups working to broaden food access. And yet, we can't ignore so many in Israel and in the wealthiest countries all around the world are hungry. What must be done? In the spirit of Birkat HaMazon, in the spirit of the blessings that we say when we finish a meal, when we've enjoyed a table, when we've been with friends and we can feel like we're leaving full, what has to be done to fulfill the obligation that food is not only a necessity, but a right? And now, something for the road. A tip, a recommendation, to help you make every journey your own.
So today we have the honor and pleasure of being here with Joseph Gitler, founder and chairman of Leket. Joseph, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So tell us a little bit about your role at Leket and your vision for Leket and how it's moving forward today.
So thank you again for the opportunity. So my role at Leket, I guess, has changed over the years. When I founded the organization, as many listeners of this podcast would understand, if they've started businesses or charities, you have to be a jack of all trades. You do everything. In the beginning, that was coming up with the idea and thinking about who would be the easiest targets to convince of the possibilities of this being something realistic. And for me, that was local caterers near Ra'anana, where I live. And the response by those caterers when I called and said, do you have excess food, which you're not utilizing? People aren't eating it at the event. And of course, then it's probably being thrown away. And the answer was almost a uniform yes. So I knew at that point I was onto something. And in those days, my role was making those calls, doing the pickups, and then after a few months of doing that on my own, recruiting volunteers.
Just to take you back, when was that?
Around March 2003. So we're getting close. Hard to believe. I mean, no one saw me biting my lip there because this is audio, but they were getting close to 22 years. In fact, I only knew it was 22 years because I guess somehow in LinkedIn, in my profile, it says when Leket started. So I've been getting messages. Congratulations on your 22nd work anniversary. So really the beginning was me in my Aliyah car going late at night and picking up excess food from catering halls and then distributing it to need-based organizations in the area around Ra'anana, Kfar Saba, Herzliya, Tel Aviv. And that really was a bit of a lark. And it was something that I think anyone who's been to Israel, and frankly, anyone who comes from the Western world understands that we waste food with abandon. It bothers everyone. Everyone talks about it. But like many issues, not a lot gets done. And I will tell you, even after 22 years, that I haven't seen a big change in the creation of excess. Okay, meaning, I don't think we made a big change in what people serve on Shabbat. And I don't think we made a big change in how breakfasts are served in Israeli hotels or corporate cafeterias or army bases. And I don't think we've made a change, despite the 75 million pounds of fruits and vegetables that we plan to collect this year, in the way farmers run their businesses. But that being said, it matters less if that food is rescued, right?
Right.
If it's wasted, then we have a problem. But if there are organizations like Leket in Israel and others in many other places around the world who figure out logistical solutions to that food, then we have less of an issue. And in fact, the big change I'd say in the last 22 years is not so much consumer behavior, but there's a lot more action and growth by the charities on the one end and also businesses. So I'll give an example. One of the things I've started to see at supermarkets around the world is a section in the fruit and vegetable aisle where they sell what they call ugly edibles. And that's fruits and vegetables which are safe, nutritious, healthy, but they look funny. And because they look funny, they wouldn't have ever made it into the supermarket. But now maybe they are, but at a discount. Because to use Israeli parlance, we're not friars, right? Meaning we all know that that funky looking cauliflower is just and safe and healthy. But why should I pay the same for that as a cauliflower that looks magnificent? But if you give it to me for 25% off, it's going to sell. And so that's been a change. And subscription businesses and businesses now, for example, there's one in Tel Aviv, a startup where at the end of the day, small supermarkets and small restaurants can put excess meals that they have for half price. And you don't always know what you're getting. Sometimes it's a surprise, but that's been great. A lot of students have told me, like, that allows them to get decent quality food at a good price and local. Okay, so that's been very endearing to see that while the amount of food being produced hasn't changed, there are a lot more people looking at it either from a for-profit or not-for-profit. And frankly, it doesn't really matter. And the reason I say that is because most estimates say in the West, about 40% of food that's grown or manufactured ends up in landfills. So that leaves enough room for the charities and for the businesses. And even everything that's being done now is still only taking, unfortunately, a small chunk of that waste.
Wow, incredible. So if we're looking at the landscape of Leket and everything you do, what does that look like? You talked to us back to the time when you were in touch with caterers and you were looking at excess. So how has that developed until today?
Right, so Leket is a bit of a monster. Today, we're a big, big organization. We have about 200 employees in Israel, all working in concert with, let's say, since October 7th, we've had over 100,000 volunteers also helping us in various capacities. And really what everyone's doing is trying to help either with the logistics, the picking, or the packing, or repacking, I should call it, of excess safe cooked meals. And that's coming from dozens of army bases and corporate cafeterias and event halls and hotels. That's the main part. And the goal this year is around 3 million cooked meals that come from those sources. And then produce, most of our volunteers are working in produce, either in the fields where we have an opportunity, we send people, or in our distribution center where people come to grade and repackage for delivery to our agency partners. And that's an important point. Leket in general, there are exceptions, but in general, we're not a direct service provider, meaning we don't go directly to the home of the poor because we have too much bulk. We would need 1,000 employees to do that. Instead, we utilize existing holy organizations throughout the country, soup kitchens, homeless shelters, Meals on Wheels programs, after-school clubs for kids, working with all communities in the country, all geographies in the very small country, reaching over 300,000 people every week. So it's a lot of work. I say to people, oh, so how do I sleep at night? And people say, what do you mean, how do you sleep at night? Look where you started, right? You should feel good about yourself. But the point is, you want to know you're helping people move on. It's not just about calories. No one's starving in Israel. Okay, this is not chas v'shalom, as we say in Hebrew, like that woe is us. if that was the case here. No one's starving in Israel. You have a lot of people struggling to make ends meet, maybe not getting the right nutrition. So really, what we're hoping to do with our food, not only and not always, but primarily, is to get it to agencies that are looking at the bigger picture. How do I get this person out of poverty? So 25% of all our cooked meals go to after-school club for kids. Why? For two reasons. One, now they have a high-quality hot meal that they can offer the kids. They don't have to worry about the fundraising. It gets the kids in the door. And if they had the money for food, now they can use that money for something else. Buy each kid a computer. Pay for their driving lessons. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter to us. And so that's how I sleep at night because, I like to hope and think that the meals at Leket and the money that's donated to Leket by our donors ends up feeding kids who then go to the army when they weren't thinking about it, end up in the workforce, paying taxes and becoming good citizens of the state of Israel.
It's extremely powerful. So you're talking about, it's not just a question of like calories, it's a question of, the quality of the food and how you see that from one act of them getting the correct nutrition to that potentially affecting the trajectory of their future. And that's incredibly powerful. Thank you so much, Joseph, for sharing with us today the tremendous work and role of Leket in sustaining our poor and keeping our country going. I really appreciate it. And we look forward to hearing more about your amazing work.
Thank you again for the opportunity. For those coming to visit or those who live in Israel, please go to our website to volunteer, www.leket.org. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Dive deeper into the world of travel on our J Squared Adventures website. That's j2adventures.com. And stay in the loop with our latest adventures on all our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all under J2 Adventures. And if you enjoyed hanging out with us, don't forget to leave us a comment, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, travel safely and keep wondering. I'm Sorrel.
I'm Scott.
See you soon with the Wandering Jews.